There we are. Hi, welcome to Environmental Action Civics Week and our actually very first event. I'm Vince Meldrum, the president and CEO of EarthForce, and we are excited to kick off Environmental Action Civics Week this week with a research cafe. And the goal of this event is to talk about the latest in research around civic engagement, environmental engagement, youth empowerment, and we have some fantastic people joining us today. I am really excited. I was just telling these guys we were talking backstage, as it were, and I am really excited because I got to read some of their research this week. Some of which I read before, but I got to reread it and got to read some new stuff that's out there. And so I'm excited for you guys to get to hear everything that's happening there. And I just want to mention real quick, if you want to make a comment or ask a question about any of our speakers, just do so in the comment section, and we will read it out or ask the question during the session. And so before we get started, I get the pleasure of introducing everybody. And all of these organizations and or individuals are people that EarthForce has worked with in the past. And that's why you see the big smile on my face, is because I know how exciting and how much fun it's going to be to hear from everybody. So our first panelist, not speaking quite yet, but just in terms of introduction, is Erin Goulet. Erin is with the University of Michigan, though I think she used to be at the University of Wisconsin. It's like a moving target for me. School for Environment and Sustainability, which is actually a place where we've gotten a lot of EarthForce staff in the past, and some of our programming had originated there, and so we're excited. Erin does a lot of really interesting work researching youth involved in environmental issues, particularly around some eco-anxiety issues and marginalized youth, and has worked a lot with one of our partners there in Michigan, the SEMIS Coalition. If you don't know them, you should look them up. They're fantastic. The second person we have is Ruby Bell Booth, and Ruby is new to us, so we're excited to have our first time working with Ruby. Ruby is at Circle at Tufts University. If you have any interest in civic education research whatsoever, you have to visit Tufts University Circle website. They do all kinds of amazing stuff. Ruby is going to be talking to us today a little bit more about voting and climate and anxiety, and the emphasis and the work that young people, or not the work, the ability of that to engage young people and what's changing along those lines. And so I'm really excited to hear her presentation, and excited to hear all of them, but I'm excited to hear hers. And then finally, we have Jennifer Earle with us. And Jennifer has been with us a couple of times, but like Erin, she keeps moving universities. She used to be at the University of Arizona, which as an Arizona State University alum is really painful for me. But now she is at the University of Delaware, where my daughter will be graduating from in just a little while. So I'm super excited about having Jennifer with us. And Jennifer has some really interesting research and thoughts on youth engagement, particularly around, I have to read this out because I'm going to mess it up, around the deficit model versus an agency model approach, which has been a lot of conversation that we've been having internally over the last little while. And so we're excited to have all of these perspectives and excited to have the conversation begin. And so they are saying to me, you need to keep going. And so I will keep going. So just as a start, if everybody could share in the chat, or if you want to, we would love to hear from you what role research plays in your work. Right, whether you are a researcher yourself or if you're a program person or anything like that, how do you access research? And what role does research play in your work? And so we're going to start our presentations today with Erin Goulet. And Erin is going to talk to us a little bit about her research and the work that she's doing. And welcome, Erin. We're super excited to have you.
Thank you, Vince. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I can't see all of your answers yet, but I'm hoping to be able to see more about how research influences practice and practice influences research. I think that's key to a lot of the work that we do. I guess I wanted to start by saying that I took the blurb about this event to heart and wanted to focus on the stories behind the research. And so I want to share with you today two stories, stories about two projects that we've been working on. And I'll start with a little bit of background about the work that we do and what the context of the research that I'm sharing today. As Vince, I think, mentioned earlier, we have been working with the Southeast Michigan Stewardship Coalition for over a decade in a research practice partnership. And this is a research community of folks from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the University of Michigan, in partnership with the Southeast Michigan Stewardship Coalition, and then teachers and community partners with whom they work. Education, I guess you would call them a support organization, working with teachers and students to foster place-based education in K through 12 schools. And we've been documenting, like I said, for more than a decade, sort of student learning in what you could call place-based stewardship education, or I think it really closely aligns with environmental action civics. So that's great for this week that is celebrating environmental action civics. And we have actually dubbed it, we're calling it something a little different, and that is environmental civic science. And it closely aligns with environmental action civics in that what students and teachers do is investigate environmental issues in their community, work collectively with peers, with teachers and community partners to take action on an environmental issue that they find in their community. And I tried to think a little bit about what I could share about this work that was unique. And I think the way that we are thinking about environmental action civics is that it is using science and civic knowledge and skills to apply to community needs for the public good. And so we think of this sort of as de-siloing both civic and science learning and knowledge. And I thought maybe what would best highlight this work is just to share stories of two projects that we worked on. So the first that I want to tell you about, and I think that in the chat or somewhere, there's a video that highlights this project. It was called Urban STEM Stewards. And the idea of this project was, like I said, students are working in peer teams and with community partners and teachers to address a community environmental issue. And the focus, as you can probably tell from the title, Urban and STEM, was students who live in urban communities. In particular, it was student of color that we worked with, but really it could have been any students in urban communities. And the idea was that they would go through this process and apply their STEM knowledge and their civic knowledge and skills to community environmental issues. And there's two things that I wanted to sort of highlight about our were able to apply their STEM and civic learning to, making that visible and sharing other work that people sort of like them that they could identify with in some way, whether they looked like them or lived in the same kind of place or were doing the same kind of project, sharing that with students. Both of those things seem to make a difference in how students saw themselves as capable of using their civic and science skills to apply to community good, and also their identity, not necessarily as scientists, but as people who could use science for the public good. And could use those skills, both in science and civics, to have a voice for community change. So the two sort of story pieces I wanted to share with you. One is highlighted in the video that is going to be shared. That is of a young man, this is a high school student named Dante. So in the work that they did with their and they worked with the Water Resources Commissioner's office in the county where they live to install rain gardens and to install, I guess, sort of experimental permeable pavement area by the school to stop some of that flooding. And it wasn't until like a year later or something after the project was finished that we reconnected with Dante, this young man, and he shared that he had taken his learning from that project to his own home and community. He noticed flooding that was happening in, I I guess it was like an apartment complex where he lived, and took it to the community center now and the people and the decision makers who ran the community center, and told them about his work at school and how they had been able to mitigate flooding on their school campus, and shared with them the results of their work and how it had, made a change right there by their school. And the decision makers in that apartment complex decided that they were also going to put in some rain gardens or plant material. I'm not sure exactly what they ended up doing, but to mitigate flooding that was happening in that space as well. So Dante really felt like he not only was able to make a difference on his campus, but take the same learning later in life and apply it to where he lived, and make change there as well. And the other piece that I wanted to share from this project is just a quick quote, and I'm going to paraphrase the quote for you, but this speaks to the idea of students thinking of themselves as somebody who can use their science and civic skills to create change in their community. And I think key is we often think of science identity as young people needing to think of themselves as, quote, scientists. But a lot of young people don't think of themselves as scientists. They see scientists as, you have to go to school for a long time. It still could be somebody in that white lab coat standing with beakers, who does very sciencey things. But from this work, they are able to see themselves as young people and into their adulthood who can apply their scientific knowledge and skills to those community issues. So this was from a young middle school aged Black student, female, who said, I used to think of science as Bill Nye the Science Guy. That's what I thought about as a scientist. But working with these two young Black women who led me through this process, now I see science as something I can do. And I think science is for everyone now. So that to me really speaks to the idea that not only can create change, but can see themselves and their identity as being able to have a voice in decision making when they use their science skills and their civic skills to create that change. I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to just quickly tell you about our current project. And this is a little bit different, and I think it will resonate with Earth Force and Action Civics. And Vince, you'll be happy about this as well, because in this work, students are going through the same process, but the slight difference is that we have asked them to, instead of doing direct action, like I would see maybe that example of the rain garden and permeable pavement being, we've asked students to advocate for change in their community. So work with decision makers in their community to make change to a policy or practice that is happening. And the way that they do this is through calls to action. They go through a process of, again, investigating community environmental issues, researching those issues, mapping power and decision makers and who has the power to make a change about those things, and then telling a story with everything that they have gathered to advocate for community change. And we're seeing a lot of great results. They're just kind of preliminary things so far, but students are showing gains in things like agency, their socio-political control, the way that they see themselves as being able to have a voice and have people in power listen to them. And again, to have a right to have that voice in community decision-making, and the ability, I guess, really to put forth that voice. And one thing that I just wanted to highlight real quickly about this work that we think is especially important is that it seems to be demystifying the idea of who decision makers are. And maybe this is from our perspective as adults, that we often think about civic engagement and decision making in terms of voting and who elected officials are. But in one case, these students worked extensively with their facilities managers as the decision makers in their community. They wanted to make a change to where the grounds compost was located so that it wasn't as close to a body of water and therefore wasn't letting all those nutrients go into the water. Seeming like a small change, but also something that has a lot of background and other logistics involved in it. So they work closely with this facilities manager, who also holds the position of being the person who is responsible for stormwater management of the whole school district, and worked with him to move behind the desk that are the folks who make decisions about how community environmental issues are addressed. Um, and and I think it just sort of highlights that the other avenues that youth have to enact change and to enact sort of their democratic voice in that community decision making. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you. You're right. I do love that story. I love pretty much everything that you had to say. So that is good. One quick technical thing: we're having a little bit of a lag problem with StreamYard for some of you, so I apologize for that. We are working on our back end, make sure it works out. So hopefully we can get that together. So we're gonna move from Aaron, and I think that last little bit that Aaron was saying is just a great transition to hear from Jennifer, Jennifer Earle at the University of Delaware, about her work and the research that she's doing.
Thanks, Vince. I'm really so happy and thankful that you invited me to chat today. Aaron, those findings were really inspiring. And Ruby, I can't wait to hear what we're going to learn from you. And I'm really looking forward to being in conversation with all the folks who are, I can only see as comment bubbles right now. But this is exciting. So while many people hand-wring about the levels of engagement by young people, my research and research by others finds clear evidence of pretty substantial and meaningful engagement by young people. For instance, if you consider campaigns and elections, volunteering, activism, and other forms of participatory politics all together, and you add them up, in a very high quality national survey, only about a quarter of youth hadn't participated in any of these activities over the polling period. So if you really think about all the different ways that young people can be involved, young people are killing it. And I think that it's really important that we start from that empirical basis, because a lot of times our conversations don't. In fact, my big message for today is that if you want to support young people's engagement, we need to be communicating to young people that we are their allies. We want them to be difference makers, and they can do it on their terms because their voices are important. Unfortunately, a much less productive alternative narrative confronts young people every day. That narrative criticizes young people for their tactics and decisions. So this is an article about somebody who was a civil rights activist and when they were young and got criticized for that activism, but now was struggling with some of the some activism with Black Lives Matter. It's also a narrative that treats young people as incapable or as easy marks. Now, while these are two popular press pieces, this isn't just the media that's doing this either. There are researchers who are also involved in this conversation. So, for instance, some psychologists worry about the brain development, the psychological capacity of young people to be involved in ways that are, to me, pretty troubling. Academics, particularly people who study youth engagement, have a label for this. We call it the youth deficit model. And that youth deficit model essentially tells young people that they're not doing it right and that the only way to do it right is through adult leadership of them. So adults have to tell them how to become politically proper, and then have to, sort of provide mentoring or tutelage across that engagement. While it may seem like that's something that happens outside of movements and activism, it's also something that people from my research and the research of my teammates shows that young people are experiencing even inside movements and inside movement organizations. That is, just because you're a grassroots organization doesn't mean that because you're grassroots that you're necessarily connecting with young people in productive ways. For instance, organizations may be grassroots but still be dismissive of young people's concerns and interests. those organizations may see themselves as existing to speak on behalf of young people. This is actually where PTAs came from, was the belief that somebody needed to speak for young people instead of young people speaking for themselves. Carrying in other kinds of adultist assumptions within organizations, like that older people know how to do things better and don't face exactly the same kinds of issues and activism that younger people face. One that you see a lot is asking for young people's labor, but not asking for their ideas, their agency, their creativity. And it's important to recognize that how this happens both outside of movements and inside of movements is a process that involves intersectional disadvantage. So if one understands young people and youth actually to be an axis of inequality, there are other parts of an intersectional identity that are amplifying these deficit processes for specific groups of young people. I think as a way to think about this, a good amount of qualitative research, like people like Gordon and Taft, who have been in young people's organizations, seeing how those organizations work, they really find that a lot of people do what the Sunrise Movement did. They say, see, we don't see ourselves, we don't feel valued, and so we actually have to step out. And so if you have an organization that has young people in it, I think a good check-in in my book is this. If you would not say the same sentence about another marginalized community, you probably shouldn't say it about young people. And if you would not design a program for another marginalized community in a specific way, you should probably not design it that way for young people either. But that's a sort of what you shouldn't do piece of advice, which isn't super inspiring. And so let's talk about what you should do. There is an alternative. And that alternative involves centering youth agency and really focusing on how elders can be allies as opposed to people who are leading the show. For instance, as researchers, we could conduct research that helps to center young people and their agency by raising both public and academic awareness of the really foundational role that young people have played in movements. This involves things like knowing what young people care about and what they want to do and their ideas on things in a way that we don't even often have data on. I wrote about this in a recent William T. Grant newsletter. I think that link is probably going to get posted. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to belabor this, although I'm happy to come back and discuss it more during Q&A. I do want to switch to what can organizations do? How could we use research to support young organizers as change makers directly? I think one of the first things we can do is to really move from a place of here's what you should do to a place of here are the things you may want to consider. And then part of being an activist at any age is weighing out those considerations for your own particular struggle or movement. So I was involved in a MacArthur-funded effort that produced some questions that young activists could ask themselves that was research informed. So people could ask themselves and other activists, how do I improve my messaging by figuring out why does this matter to me? That's actually something that every activist needs to figure out how to do. And young activists, like all activists, need to figure out how to do that through their lived experience in their lives. Young activists, like all activists, need to think about how much should I share? What are the boundaries between my private life, security concerns I might have, but also the authentic connection I might create with people by sharing. So in this research project, what we did was essentially try to take all of the findings that were coming out of this, and instead of saying, so you should do this, we said, here are 10 questions that we think you may want to ask yourself, that through answering them, we think you'll get to a more effective movement, but we're not going to prejudge where that answer would fall. Another example of doing this is sharing our research results in ways that are more accessible than in our research papers. So some teammates, Thomas Mayer and Thomas Elliott, and I created this Informing Activist series, which is a set of online videos hosted by a very popular social movement blog, Mobilizing Ideas. And those videos cover a range of different topics with about 3 to 5 minute videos from world leading researchers on each of those topics. If you would just advance the slide one more. Thanks. Awesome. So these are some of the kinds of things that get addressed in those videos. What does research say about how movements make a difference? How and when do social movements make a political difference? There's stuff in there about tactics. There's stuff in there about leadership. And what we've done in each case is gotten a 3 to 5 minute, occasionally it's a little longer, but we try to get 3 to 5 minute videos from leading researchers to basically summarize what's the state of knowledge, so that you can get that in some digestible format and try to think through how that matters. The final set of things that you can do, I think, are try to bring research into policy and into civic education in a way that is really centered around supporting young people's engagement by reducing the roadblocks that honestly we're creating for them. We spend a lot of time creating roadblocks for young people's engagement and then blaming them, scolding them. Why didn't you get involved despite this huge set of roadblocks we placed in your way? And it turns out young people are still hurdling over those roadblocks. They're still getting involved. But we need government and schools to think about how they can actively think about their job as removing those roadblocks, and that the problem may be not with kids, but the problem may be how we're treating kids. Thanks.
Sorry about that. That's great. I love the part about the adults, how adults treat kids and whether or not they let them engage. We're leading a practitioners group about environmental engagement and civic issues, and the issue keeps coming up: how do we convince adults to let youth do something? And so that is one of those challenges. So as we go, if anybody wants to join in and add some comments, that would be great. And we have one last presentation. That's Ruby Bell Booth from Circle at Tufts University. And if you were here when we started, I'm really excited to have Ruby Bell join our little community that we're continuing to build at EarthForce. So Ruby Bell, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Vince. And what a treat to follow Erin and Jennifer, such exciting and relevant research that is so connected to everything we think about at Circle. As Vince said, I am Ruby Bell Booth. I am a researcher at Circle, which is the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement. It's a mouthful. We're based at the Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts University. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see just a bit more about who Circle is. We're a nonpartisan research center that's really focused on youth civic engagement. That means anything from youth voting to K-12 civic education to youth activism to how young people understand media. And across the board, we're really focused on connecting with our partners. All of our research is really, really centered around being useful to partners on the field working with young people, and really taking a lead from them to understand what would be most helpful and supportive. And then along with that, focusing on how both Circle and our research and our partners can work towards eliminating systemic barriers that prevent young people from participating. And I really give this whole background to say that the reason why we've dug deep a couple of times on civic engagement and climate is because of what we're hearing from young people and from our partners, which is that this is such a huge issue that is at the top of mind for so many young people in a way that really defines the generation. And we saw this most recently in 2024 in our post-election survey, where climate change was the fourth top issue that young people listed. Technically, they chose like their top 3 issues. So it's like the fourth top 3 issue. It's kind of complicated, but it's either way, a really important issue, with 26% of 18 to 34-year-olds saying it's one of the 3 issues that most impact the way they're thinking when they show up at the ballot box. And it's something that's consistently been in the top for several election cycles now. I think cost of living and inflation and abortion really jumped to the top in 2022 and have stayed there, but climate change has been consistently top 5 for a long time. And we find that Asian youth and young people in Western states are more likely to sort of rank this really high, but we see that it's an issue that permeates across a lot of different divides, whether it's urban, rural, gender, race, lots of different things. That said, there are some trends. One of which is that climate's a bigger priority among young people who vote. So there's an 11-point increase among young voters and young voters who are ranking this as an issue compared to non-voters. This isn't necessarily to say that young people who care about climate are more likely to vote, or that people who vote are more likely to care about the climate. That's like not what this research can help us to conclude, but it does highlight that there's some sort of connection that's happening between this interest and concern around climate change and the environment and participation in voting in elections. On the next slide, you'll see maybe one of the reasons for this. This is actually from some research we did in 2020, so a while back, but I think we've confirmed it or continued to repeat it a few times. And we found that young people who are concerned about climate tended to rank higher in something we called civic readiness, which it was a measure of to what extent young people were prepared or interested in or had taken part in different kinds of civic activities, like going to a demonstration or serving in a leadership role. So not only are young people who are concerned about climate more likely to vote, but they're also prepared or interested in getting involved in other ways. As you'll see, if they select climate as a top 3 issue, they're a lot more likely to be in that top quartile, 38% of them compared to 25%. And those who did not select it are more likely to be in that bottom quartile of civic readiness. This is all sort of the context that prompted us to do a deeper dive on young people, civic engagement, and climate change. We've done 2 reports that are a little more detailed, a little more focused on this topic in partnership with Action for the Climate Emergency. And I'm going to quickly go over both of them. This first one was done in 2022, and we did a survey of young people to see who was taking action on climate. And what were some of the tools and competencies that were helping to get them to take action? So the most common sort of activities were signing a petition, having a conversation with a friend or family member, or using social media to, inform others, whereas contacting an elected official, protesting, going to a public meeting, those were less common. And in the report, which I think will be shared in the chat, there's breakdowns of what are the demographics that are doing these different types of actions, which I think are really interesting because it sort of shows how different context and cultural dynamics are impacting young people's engagement when it comes to climate. An example is that men were the least likely to have conversations with their family and peers. That was the activity that they were least likely to do compared to women and non-binary youth who were a lot more likely to do it. And I think it underscores probably a reality about modern masculinity and how it intersects with politics and young men's, relationships with their friends and family. And that helps organizations or educators or, even the Circle team to think about how to approach our research, how to get young men engaged when it comes to climate. They need support to have the tools to get engaged, and they need to feel confident to have those conversations. We looked then a little closer at, how things like readiness, efficacy, and motivation differed by different demographics and how it shaped young people's tendency to take different kinds of actions, whether they were sort of short-term, single opportunity actions, like signing a petition, or more longer-term, higher effort actions. And these are the takeaways, what you can see on the slide here from this whole study. First is that interest and concern about climate and the environment are across all demographics, which I highlighted earlier. And there is such opportunity to increase climate actions taken by youth, because we find that despite the sort of universality, I think that's close enough, you know what I mean, of this sort of interest and concern, only about 71% of young people are taking no action on climate, or little action, despite there being a lot more young people than just 29% who are concerned about climate. So there's this huge opportunity, which is fabulous. But a piece of that, to take advantage of that opportunity, there needs to be skill building. And that's what we found, whether it was with young men or conservative young people, they were less comfortable communicating about climate change and about the environment. And that's because of cultural dynamics, probably. It's because of just less opportunities to practice those skills. So when thinking about how to increase that engagement, you have to think about what tools do we need to be supporting young people with. And we also found that young people who, just anyone who wasn't liberal or a Democrat, really wanted additional skills and support to take action. I think because the conversations are just happening less in their community, they're seeing less opportunities. So they need more access, more support to the skills and opportunities and pathways to take action. So that's that first study from 2022. Then we followed up in 2023 with another one. And in this study, I didn't do it. My colleague Sarah Suzuki, who's fabulous, who led both of these reports and is taking extremely well-deserved vacation right now, which is why you have me and not her brilliance. She did this kind of complicated advanced statistical modeling called latent profile analysis. And I only understand it well enough to explain it to someone else who doesn't understand it, which is perfect, hopefully, for this situation. But basically, you take all these different factors, in this case, things like how likely are young people to be affected, or were these young people affected by the effects of climate change? Do they have efficacy around the issue? Do they believe in their influence, or do they feel powerless? What is their relationship to wanting government action? Through all of these factors into a statistical model, and it spits out profiles. And it's 4 profiles in this case that sort of lump young people together based on their shared views and beliefs. And that is what this pie chart shows. 40% of young people are not being directly impacted by climate by their own reporting, but they believe in their influence on the issue, which is really exciting, and we're going to come back to them in a second. 15% totally disengaged from the climate issue, probably feel powerless, probably don't really care enough to feel powerless, if you know what I mean, aren't concerned about it, not being directly affected. 16% are being affected, they're exposed to it, but they feel really powerless and like they don't have a voice. And this last 29% are threatened and they really want government action. And on the next slide, some of the takeaways from this breakdown that we identified are really, really exciting. And they have a lot of similar takeaways from the prior report. There's this amazing untapped potential in this 40% of young people who believe in their own power and their own influence and are not currently taking action. They're participating at a really low level in civic actions, but they have this sense of their power, and they're more likely to be Black youth from lower income households and a lot younger, which I think highlights a reality that those are young people who are less likely to see pathways to have influence, but somehow, like against all odds, they see themselves as having this power. And so it's so exciting and a really, really huge opportunity to take advantage of this potential. Something else we highlighted, this was coming out, the year before the election, was that a majority of young people weren't strongly identifying with either political party. And there was this opportunity to use climate as an issue to sort of help them sort out where they land and how they want to get engaged in elections. So about 56% of young people had weak party alignment, and there's an opportunity to help them think about, have sort of greater civic development in the context of climate by thinking about, who they are on the political spectrum. There is also a really big connection between information and action, and information and feelings about climate. So government approval tended to be really connected to how much information young people had about what the government was doing. When they knew about what the government was doing, again, this is in 2023, important to consider the context, but when they knew about government actions, they were more likely to feel like the government was doing the right thing and approve of it. Also, we find that young people who have access to civic information or who are participants in civic organizations helps with increasing that feeling of power and influence. And this is, if you read any of our other research, really, really unsurprising. We find that young people who have a political home, who have a place where they talk about politics and can build a civic identity, are a lot more likely to be engaged. They're a lot more likely to be engaged in a sustainable way without like a serious toll to their mental health. They're a lot more likely to vote. They're a lot more likely to feel like they have community belonging. So this kind of access to not only civic information, but organizations that help young people to wrestle with that information and think about how they want to take action is vital. And that's because it helps to build those skills that we were identifying that so many young people are looking for so that they can take action. And those are our big studies we've done on, at least recently, on civic engagement and climate. And I think the big takeaway, which is on the next slide, is that there's a role for everyone. I mean, I listed K-12 after school spaces and more, so I guess that implies everyone, to really help young people to take that step. They want to take action on climate change. And this is something else we see. They want to take action on the issues that matter to them, by and large, whether it's climate or anything else, but they really need tools and support to do it. They also need a culture that helps to show them that that is meaningful work and that it's something that's worth doing. You know, young people who are coming from a background where young voices are not uplifted, as Jennifer was talking about a lot, the sort of adultism that is naturally all around us. It's so important that the culture that young people are engaging in is also supportive of young people taking action. So that's sort of the big takeaway I hope that everyone has, is just this need to continue to build the skills that young people have so they can get engaged.
Thanks, Ruby. I'm going to jump over to questions. We only have a few minutes left, but I'm going to jump over to questions. One that there are two that have come up that I want to pick up on. The first one is skill building, and I think that's where Ruby was ending to some extent. Is that young people are calling for more skills or skill building, but can we? Can you guys come together and identify a few of those kinds of skills that young people need to develop prior to the age of voting, right? And what kind of skills can people? What does the research say about that kind of skill building? And maybe I'll start with Erin, because that question comes from somebody named Connie Flanagan, and I think they've met.
Yeah, she's works on this project with me, and I think I guess two things to highlight in terms of skill building that I think are critical. One, in terms of especially action around environmental issues and like sort of the wicked problems like climate change that our society faces. The need for collective skill building is critical. So a lot of environmental education in the past has historically been about behavior change, what you can do to lower your own carbon footprint, et cetera. But if we're truly going to make a difference in these broad and global environmental, socio-environmental issues that we're faced with, we need to be able to work with other people and take on their perspectives, build trust with those other people to affect change. There's been a lot of research globally around how communities come together to protect their commons. If folks have heard about the tragedy of the commons idea that if communities are left to sort of manage their own resources by themselves, they will take advantage of it and people will free ride and folks won't come together to manage those resources effectively. But that's been debunked over the years. And the things that are really important to communities successfully being able to do that are things like having solidarity with each other, having trust in each other, and having collaborative skills that enable them to be able to work together. I think the other really key thing to me is that young people especially, but really all of us, need spaces to practice skills, and not just practice the skills, but practice actually taking action, whether that's advocacy in political spaces, or if that is direct action in community and making a change that you want to see. We're not often afforded those opportunities. I think of myself and how it's hard to stand up at my own city council meetings and take my 3-minute public comment period. But the reason that it's hard is because we don't get a chance to practice those things as we're growing up. That kind of civic education has gone away, and civic education has become studying what the different arms of government are, and not actually how you have a voice in creating change and building power to have your say and how it goes. So I think the skills, in terms of like research and gathering data and public speaking and all those things are important, but maybe the most important thing is just to be able to do it in a sanctioned space. And though non-formal education is extremely important, it also leaves out a lot of young people who don't self-select into those spaces. So schools are a place that I think it's really important that young people are given the opportunity to do it.
And that practice, you hear a sound here from me on actually getting practice leading to that. Jennifer, could you pick up that a little bit in your deficit versus agency model, and going back to the skills? What are the kind of key skills that you see young people needing to build to become civic participants, even before voting age?
Sure. So I would say skill-wise, they mostly need the same skills that people who are older than them need too, and also probably lack. So like I always like to sort of re-norm people from the idea that just because you hit a certain age, you're automatically a good and skillful political thinker. Like if you think about any of those like Tonight Show kind of things when they go out with a mic and ask people different political questions, the answers can be kind of horrifying. And I think a lot of times we sort of accidentally embody this deficit model by approaching young people by thinking about they're the ones that need the skills versus actually probably everyone needs these skills, but this is the group of the people we're trying to help right now. And that's a really different message to deliver. Everyone needs these skills. We're here to help you. Versus not everyone needs these skills. You need these skills. Those are two really different ways of doing that. And, a lot of times actually, like when people think about these things, they don't even always align with where young people may be particularly experiencing problems. So I like to pick on early conversations about misinformation, disinformation. Like when this started to be an issue, like almost any public talk about this would end, we need to teach the kids. Except for if you look at work on what work has looked at age on misinformation and disinformation, I'm sorry, 18 and under are not your major Fox News demographic. That's not who is consuming a lot of this misinformation and disinformation and spreading it. And so actually, like to be a little cheeky, like an AARP seminar on on misinformation and disinformation would be delivering pretty needed skills to a group of people who grew up when you could trust media, when you didn't assume that a bunch of stuff was probably wrong or untrue, or you weren't necessarily talking to the person that you thought you were talking to. Now, that doesn't mean that young people aren't asking for help in various areas, but it also just means that other people also probably need that same help. And so that's why when I was going over like the 10 questions, answering those questions all involve developing and applying skills, but they are questions that any activist should ask themselves and try to answer to be more effective. I'm just trying to help young people do it. And so I would really focus on skills for everyone, but what is just for kids, I think, just for younger people, is you're important, because that's what they're not getting anywhere else. The message that your voice matters, you can do it. A bunch of things have been up against you trying to do it, and you're still doing it. That's the message that is just for young people, because that's the message they're not getting. And that's really important for them developing, feeling like they can develop a voice. Because this model of you can't do it, you can't do it, you can't do it, you don't have the skills, you're 18, why didn't you do it? What's wrong with you? That makes no sense.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with you. I'm going to go to, we have one last question, I think, and then we're going to have to wrap up. But there was a question earlier that I think builds off, Jennifer, what you just said. The question was, how do you get kids to talk about what's important to them? And I think if we could each just do a quick, like a minute, 30 seconds, something, what you think, how to do that. And Ruby Bell, we're going to start with you.
All right. Ask them. That's where I would start. Which I know sounds really, really basic, but I think that not very many young people are having somebody ask them what they care about. And I think too often when that's happening, especially in the context of this conversation, we might be jumping way too many steps ahead too quickly to talk immediately about politics. But I think it's first building, or, civic action, climate, whatever it is. I think it's important to just start building those conversations with young people, helping them to build the skill of communicating. That's something our research was showing, was that a lot of them just don't have the skills to talk to their friends and family about things they care about. So just practicing being able to talk about that. And maybe they're going to talk really passionately about sports for the first hour that you talk to them. But maybe next time you ask them, you say, hey, what's something you really care about in your community? And then it starts to sort of zero in. So I think it is really just about letting young people practice, telling young people that you care. And it's exactly what Erin said, practice. It's exactly what Jennifer said, telling them you're listening to them. So I think, really just try asking and then ask again and keep going.
And nothing wrong with sports. Go ASU. Erin, how about you?
I guess I'll just reiterate. I think you both said it very well. And it's combining maybe those two things, creating spaces where young people feel like they can talk about what is important to them. And that means maybe as adults, making sure in ourselves we're changing that deficit narrative, that our expectations are that youth do care and do want to do something about it. I know a lot of times when doing these projects with youth, it feels like, they're just not necessarily, they're not feeling excited about this. But if you give them enough time, they show their excitement, right? And when they have the spaces to practice it, and you're really starting from a place of the youth and community driven investigation of what's happening around them, and asking them to take a step back and observe and think and reflect and bring their own personal ideas into that space of what's happening in their own community, right? So that we are looking at them as people who have expertise about what's going on in their community, who care about what's going on in their community, and can share their community knowledge. Then we're giving them a space to give voice to the things that they care about. And if the projects that they're working on, or, if it, in my case, is sort of school sanctioned, activism, and in a way, then letting them be the drivers of what are the issues that they want to do something about, I think goes a long way to showcasing what are the things that they care about.
Jennifer, one last thought on what it takes to get youth to identify what they care about?
I think you've gotten some great suggestions from Ruby and Erin. I think the thing that I would really highlight is that when you're listening, like part of listening as treating somebody as having an equally valid place that they're coming from, an equally agentic place they're coming from, is really to do as Erin suggested and really start with the assumption that the person you're talking to has something to offer that's important, that is a different perspective than you may have. And that, like conversations with anyone, you're going to be improved and your thinking is going to be improved by hearing and learning from them. And I think we have to start not just recognizing that young people have agency, their own points of view, wanting to listen, but also realizing that that can change and improve us. And that is, sort of like people say, like you could hear in somebody's voice when they're smiling. When somebody's talking to you, you could hear when they're really listening. And what we have to do is be able to show that we are really listening, because that conveys that sense of importance and that sense of voice.
That's fantastic. You guys have been fantastic. This has been, as I predicted, an enormous amount of fun to hear your perspectives. There's a lot of good going on in the world, and I know some challenging things as well. But it's amazing to me to know that we have such good base of research and researchers who are out there doing work around this. I'm going to ask the folks that are out there listening, if you have a second, to just take a second and write down your key takeaways from this session. What have you learned or picked up from this, rather than me trying to summarize? But I would love to hear from folks what they have learned and what their key takeaways from this are. And while that's happening, I am going to do a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to just have a quick call to action for everybody. So if you do or don't use Research Now, please feel free to pull down the research that is interesting to you. I think everybody that's here on the panel would be willing to interact with folks and provide research around the issues that they have talked about today. I know that Circle has an entire database of it that they curate all the time, and so I've suggested that as a good starting place before, and I think it's where I start whenever I'm looking for research. So I suggest that's a good place for you to go. I also want to say before we get too far to the end, I want to say thank you to these folks in two ways. One, thanks for taking the time today. We super appreciate that. This is I know you guys are not paid or compensated to do this, and so I think it's really amazing that you have the grace to take the time and talk to people today about what's happening. But also, thank you for being there as a practitioner that uses research and doing this and publishing and talking about the stuff that you do. It's been super important to Earth Force and how we've developed over the years. I know there are a lot of other organizations that we work with that is similar, and so I appreciate that in every way. I want to offer a couple of quick things that I think will pop up along with all of these great comments. One is that if you are interested in joining other EAC events this week, it's just earthforce.org/EAC. Second, we have a community of practice, and Haley, if you would try and squeeze it in with all these comments coming in. Our community of practice is eacalliance.mn.co, which is a little bit hard to remember, but it's got research in there and has a lot of practitioners that are working around these issues. You can follow along with our podcasts on our website, all of that. And before I say goodbye, I want to say thank you to all the Earth Force staff that make this possible. So there are 2 or 3 people on the back end of making this work. You've seen some comments in the comment section from the rest of our staff. And so it's really a team effort to make all of this happen. And I get to do the easy part, which is sit up here and talk to people I love to talk to and hear from. And so that is great for me. We have one last thing in my final minute and a half that I'm supposed to do. Is that we will put up a survey in the chat. And if you would take a few minutes to take that survey, it will help us understand what's good and bad about the programs that we do, but also helps us report on those. There are a lot of great comments of what people have taken from this that I thought would come in, but it's all kinds of stuff like being a believer, and the impact of dialogue, to the importance of acknowledging perspectives, remembering that youth want to participate, that it's important to ask youth. A lot of good things that people have taken from this. And so that is my closing remark, is there is just a lot of amazing things to learn here. Thank you, the 3 of you again for joining us. And thank you again to the Earth Force staff on the back end who make everything happen here, but then also all the other work that is going on. Thanks a bunch, and see you all soon, I hope.